Hello everybody, it's Julia with Senior Susie Stamps, and I'm glad you're here with me today. We're going to do a little beginning watercolor. This is day 2 in my journey of watercolor, and we're going to do some wet on wet and wet on dry watercoloring. And for those of you who are not following in the book, I'm really working out of this watercolor workbook by Sarah Simon. I'll leave a link to it in the description box below. For those of you who don't have a book, get a good stamp today. One like this that has a large surface area to cover. And get you some of your Versafine or some other pigment ink. And stamp a couple of images. And you'll be just fine. So that's what I'm going to do. We do need to let them dry. There we go. So that's all I needed my ink for. I'm going to put it away. I am recording this the day after I recorded the last watercolor video, because we're going to spend a lot of time next week doing some shifting of things around to the new house. And I didn't want to leave us kind of stranded. Now that stamp came from a set that's called Good Things Fancy Notes LL869. It's by Hero Arts. And it has 3 stamps in it, the one you just saw plus these other 2. And it makes a nice little wet on wet watercolor image for us. So let's get started. I have my water. It's over here. And I believe today we're going to use the number 4 round brush that I have. I'll get my paints back out. And for today's project, I'm only going to use my little palette that I started the other day. And speaking of the other day, let's go back and look at these one more time, because I wanted to bring something to your attention that I realized after they were dry. You know, when you're a beginner, you don't always understand everything. But on these images where you see it looks kind of like a muddy spot there. I believe that was too wet. I should have pulled more water out of my brush. The yellow one looks good, and the green one, you remember, I pulled some water out of it. So I think it would have been a better plan, instead of having so much left on the paper to absorb. I would have had a more even coloring if I had pulled some of that additional liquid out. Because watercolor is all about water. So let's start. Now, I've already used up my yellow because I did another little project preliminarily, trying to get ready for this today. I'm going to wet my brush and waken these paints back up a little bit by adding some water. And I'm just going to work all the little spots of paint until they start kind of doing what I want to do. And then I'm going to go ahead and paint one of these images. The other thing I didn't do when I was doing my swatches, I didn't scrub my brush back and forth. And I believe from what I've been reading, that's part of the technique to learn, is kind of scrubbing your brush back and forth to cover your surface area a little bit. So I'll see if I can do a little better today. And that's what it's like when you're learning something new every day. You try to do something just a little bit better than you did the last time. And that's good. So we're going to do a wet on wet, and we're going to do wet on dry. So I'm painting the one now that's going to be the dry later on, and we'll just let it go as it is now. And then we'll pull another color. Let's see, how about we do some blue? This is that French ultramarine blue, and I wanted to see it in action today. And I think I may have mixed a little something else in with that. I'm not sure. Now this one, we're going to do wet on wet, which means while the paint is still wet, we're going to go in and drop a little bit of a secondary paint color. So you'll still need to see that little bit of shine on your paper, and if you can't paint the first layer fast enough, that's alright, don't worry about it. Just go back and get your secondary paint color and do part of it at a time. And I'm just going to put a couple of little drops in, and we'll watch and see what the paint does. And then I'll go back and pick up the rest of this really watered out blue. And we'll finish painting this image. I'm going to go in there and get a little bit of that Payne's Gray because this blue is about used up, I think, and I don't want to get any more of it right now. And again, that's just a little too wet, I think. Let me get a baby wipe, because my cloth that I was using the other day is too wet. I washed it out today. There, now I got the little globs out. Let's get a little bit more of that red. And this is the, I think this is the Windsor Deep red. And you can see how far it drifts in that area. Now this one is dry. It's a little cool to the touch, which means it's still just a little bit damp, and that's alright. Don't care too much with the way that pulled away from the edge, which to me means that I didn't have this area wet when I dropped a little red in. It may have been colorized to begin with, but it wasn't wet when I dropped the red back in behind it, or it would have traveled over there a little bit too and not pulled away from the edge so much. When my mother was learning to do watercolor, she wanted to learn without any lines, and I'm not an artist that is of any skill level to be able to do that sort of thing, so how can I have to have my little lines to go by? Now maybe in the future I might be able to, but as of right now it's not looking good for me with no lines. So that's where we'll go with that. And so you can see how the red kind of blended out into that. Now let's take a little bit of how about this burnt sienna here, and then we're going to go in as a wet on dry, and you'll see that there's no movement there of any of the paint. And so if you want it to move, you have to move it. And there's some things that you really look forward to seeing the natural progression of the paint in. And some things, of course, you can go back in a dry area and go back and add color on top like I'm doing here, and it actually stays on top then, and it doesn't intrude into the original paint color, unless of course you saturate it too much, and then I guess it would. But there they are, wet on wet and wet on dry. So that's our little bit of paint today, and I just thought I would mention that these start out looking really hideous, and that's okay. It's part of the learning process. And I did some the other day, yesterday actually, and I made a card out of the ones that I did. They look just as hideous as those did, but I went back in and did a little pen work on these. Oh, let's talk for a minute about pens. I have two different kinds of pens here. One is a Signa Uni-ball, and it's number 207 micro pen, and it works very, very well. And then I have a set of these Pigma Micron pens in various different tip widths, and they work very, very well for inking over watercolor. So this one is not quite dry, but even if you go in just a little bit and add just a little bit of black, maybe around this area here, and of course I would go back in and paint that center as well. And then we'll add a little bit of lines up into the petal itself, just to give it a little bit of interest going on there. And almost instantly you see a dramatic difference in these two flowers. And then if I wanted to go back in and add a bright red center, for example, maybe, it would really kick it up a notch, I think. And there we go. And maybe you might want to put a little bit of black in on that, just for a little bit of texture. Just one little drop, and let it move its own around. I'll probably make a bookmark out of this for us to mark some pages. Now, before I let you go today, I want to show you a second book. And this is the one that we cut down the spine on, and I had it spiral bound by my little local printer. And here's my little ugly bookmark. But in this book, on page, this is Painting Watercolor Botanicals by Harriet de Winton, and she has a fabulous YouTube channel. I will put a link to her channel down below for you. But she has a great couple of pages here, starting on 18 and going through page 21, and it's basic botanical brush strokes. Straight lines, tapered lines, C curves, S curves, and then she shows you how to put them all together to make these fabulous flowers in the back, step by step, line by line. All you have to do, the colors that you need to mix, and everything else. So I can highly recommend this book, and I wish my mother had had it when she was learning to paint watercolor, because I believe she could have painted without lines. So I hope y'all have a great day and a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye, everybody.